Hi guys, so today's video is going to be both a non-spoiler book review and a spoilery chat for The Bird and the Blade. This book is a lot of things. It's a historical fiction, it's a retelling, it is a tragedy, it's a romance, it's a traveling story. There's so many things that this book is. The setup for it is that we are following a time period a few generations after Genghis Khan, and we have this character who is one of the descendants who has some claim to power, and we have the whole story told from the point of view of this character's slave. This is a story that I think requires a fair amount of maturity and patience. The main character, who is a slave, you see some attributes to her personality early on that a lot of people, the initial gut reaction is to find her personality or her actions, her thoughts to be very toxic, sort of. I do think that the more the story progresses, the more you understand that this poor girl has never had anybody be decent to her. There's a really powerful moment in the story where this prince, who is actually very likable, I found, he is actually very decent, he asks her, because she ends up kind of becoming so loyal to him and following him through some pretty intense situations, and he asks her, why did you stay? Why didn't you try to leave? And she doesn't really know how to answer, and her response is basically, because you gave me an apple. And it's really tragic, but really moving and impactful, because it makes you realize how much this poor girl has never had anybody be kind to her. The beginning of the book is a bit disorienting. You start off in the past, the first time that our main character meets the prince, and then you go to present day, where the prince has entered to try and win the hand of this very prominent, powerful political figure. This is a woman who has promised she will marry anybody who can solve 3 of her riddles. And so he is trying to solve these riddles to try and gain her hand in marriage, and he wishes to do this for her power, essentially, because he is reduced to not a lot in the story based off of some things that go wrong in battle, and he's trying to ensure that he can still have the power to protect his people. He thinks this is the only way he can do it. So he's desperate. He enters to try and solve these riddles, and if he doesn't get them right, he will die. That is the cost. And then you go back to the past and you start to get the pieces put together. It was definitely a very interesting way to tell the story, and you get a lot of their journey, and then you go back to present day with the riddle, and then you get a lot of their journey, and then you go back to present day with the riddle. And I definitely think that while it was slightly disorienting initially, I actually really enjoyed the way that the author did this, because it definitely builds a lot of tension. Something I think contributes to the building of this tension is the fact that the author wrote this in first person present tense. We don't really see present tense as often nowadays, but I think in this particular story, it's a single point of view story. The entire thing is through our main character's perspective. It never changes. And I think that the decision to write it in first person present tense was a good one, because while it definitely makes you feel like you're thrust into the story, which is somewhat contributing to the sense of feeling disoriented initially, once you get past those first few chapters and you start to settle in, I think it's a great choice, because you not only feel a connection to our main character, but you also just feel this sense of urgency. Because this story is historical fiction, I'm always curious how accurate the story is, how much of it's fiction, how much of it is actually fact. And I was really pleased to see when I finished the book and I was looking into it a little bit, it would seem like this author, from people who are much more knowledgeable than me, were saying that she really put in a lot of effort into making this accurate, which was really cool. I mean, people can take some liberties when writing historical fiction, but a lot of people were commending her efforts to include things that represent the culture. So things like poetry, things like language, the different inflections and their different meanings, the different kinds of jokes that can come up from things sounding similar but meaning different things, and her use of song. So one of the characters sings songs from their country, and all of those sorts of things. Basically, everybody that I saw who was familiar with those things really was pleased with the author's efforts to include those things. And I definitely felt they contributed to the overall tone and feel of the story. This author could have just made a fantasy book and then done whatever she wanted, but she kept it as historical fiction. She kept it in something real, and the effort that she put in, I thought, should be recognized. That said, there is one thing in particular that didn't quite sit well with a lot of people. I'll get into it a little more in the spoilers portion of this, but for those of you that want to have an idea without being spoiled, it does have to do with the ending of the book, and it ultimately comes down to the fact that this is a retelling of an older story, and as is common when you go back and watch old movies or you read old books, there are certain things that are kind of cringy and kind of uncomfortable. The author had two choices. She either could have changed this particular element of the story, and it is a retelling, so you can change basically whatever you want. She changed other things, of course, or she could keep this particular element of the story the way it was, and then risk having people see this particular thing as maybe not the most sensitive way to wrap up the story, because it does have to do with the ending. So it's one of those things where I don't think the author's intention was to be like, yeah, Asian people, I hope you're insulted. I don't think that was her goal at all. And I don't think she had any malicious intent. I don't think she was trying to take a culture and be like, look, isn't this so much better than your typical European story, guys? Because it's with Asian people. I don't think she had any ill intentions whatsoever. Everybody that I saw that talked about this particular thing was so classy and mature, and they were really respectful. At no point did I ever feel like anybody was trying to start a controversy. I just felt like I was educated on something that I had no idea about. So I think the whole thing is just, it's good to know going into the story that the ending of it does continue a trope that apparently is very common in how it handles Asian female characters and their value. I'll leave it at that in the non-spoiler portion. As for my thoughts about the ending, I'm obviously not Asian, and like I just said, I felt educated by what I saw other people saying, but I can't claim those thoughts as my own. However, I hated the ending. I hated it so much, and when I first finished the book, because I read this entire book in one sitting, I was like, I have not had the opportunity to read much recently. I just want to pick something up and try to get through it, because I just haven't had the time to read these like giant big epic fantasy books that are currently on my TBR. I picked this book up. I couldn't put it down. I was so in love with it. And then I started to get toward the end and I was like, no, please, don't go down this road. And then it did. And I was like, dang it, because it was going to be a new favorite for me. And I really didn't like the ending. At first I thought I didn't like it because it didn't go the way I was wanting it to go. But the more I thought about it, the more that I was thinking it was more that I so enjoyed this other chunk of the book, and this last little bit felt like it was the ending to a different story. It just didn't feel like it fit with everything else that I had read. And when I finished it and I saw that it was retelling, I was like, oh, that's why, because there are certain really notable moments in the original story that you feel like you have to include. So with Cinderella, at some point she's gonna lose her shoe, and you gotta find a way for the girl to run off and lose her shoe. And it's sometimes done so well, and you're like, I like what you did there. And other times it just feels almost misplaced. And that's what I felt about the ending of this book. It just felt like it was there because that's how the original was basically, how it basically ended. And it just didn't feel like it was the ending to the book that I had read. I'm going to get into some spoilers now, and then I'll give my final thoughts at the end. So if you want those, you can fast forward to the time on the screen. But getting into spoilers now. So the trope that some people were saying is not the best is that I guess it's very common in a lot of stories that center around Asian culture for the women to really only have value in dying. And that's what happened in this book. The character, she starts to see value in herself a little bit in the story, and the male character sees value in her and he cares about her, but it's through her death that she has meaning. And I don't mind in stories if people die for the greater good, or if people die so that somebody else can live, those sorts of things. But this girl commits suicide basically to guilt trip the mean princess into honoring her word that she would marry whoever solved her riddles. And I just feel like we could have solved that another way. So I didn't even know that this trope is common in a lot of stories for the Asian women to die or kill themselves or something of that sort in order for them to have meaning. I didn't even know about that. I just read the ending and I was like, guys, we couldn't have found a better way to wrap this up. I thought maybe we would have this impactful moment where, because the main character, her whole life, this poor girl, her family sucked. And she missed her mom. She was like, I miss my mom. She drowned. It's sad. And I'm like, your family was super messed up. They were so mean to her. They're basically like, you're ugly. You're only kind of smart, but you can't be too smart because you don't want to be smarter than your husband. But also you can't be completely stupid. There's this princess from way off, far away, who's super hot and super intelligent. She can be both. You're not. Like, they were just so awful to her. And her entire life, she was told, like, somebody is going to look at you and then decide if they want to marry you, and your entire value in your life is based around if that man decides they want you, because to have children, to be a wife, and then someday die, all of that was like what her purpose was, and she can't do any of that and honor her family and her ancestors unless a man looks at her once and is like, yeah, I'll marry her. That whole thing is why I think it made so much sense for her character to have a lot of insecurities. It was one of those situations where it wasn't just like, I'm a plain Jane, I just wish I was prettier. It wasn't like that. It's like, this girl has serious issues. So I really did enjoy so much of this book. I loved it. I was loving it. And I didn't like the ending, as you can tell, but it was leading up to the ending also when we had this twist where it turned out that our main character was sent to actually kill this smart guy, whatever his name is, and all that, like, which that was too convenient that even then they're like, I don't know his name, he's the one that's super smart, whichever one that is, you'll figure it out. And they sent her to go kill this guy, and I'm just like, oh no, like, I would have so preferred if she just became a slave and then was a slave, and then their lives, like, that's how they met. I would have preferred that so much. I did not like this whole, I can't kill anyone, I just can't do it. I can't do it. She can't even really, she can't even stick up for herself. That's what she's saying when he's training her with the knife. She's like, I can't do it though, I can't. He's like, can you just try in case somebody comes after you because I'm so in love with you? That's basically what he was saying. And she was like, all right, I'll try. And in her head, she's thinking, but I can't though. I just can't kill anybody. And at the end, she's like, that's not true. It's not that I can't kill anybody. It's just that I can't kill anybody except for me. And I just didn't like that. I didn't like that. And I didn't like that she was actually secretly sent to go kill him. I just wished it could have just been this tragic story where she became a slave and she used to be somebody of prestige, except for her life actually sucked back then too. And then she became a slave, and then there's this like tragic love story. I honestly would have preferred if he had died or they both had died. I would have preferred if everybody, her and him and the dad, if they had all died, that would have been for me. I would have liked that ending more. Anyway, that is it for my non-spoiler and spoilery review for The Bird and the Blade. I will absolutely check out other things that this author puts out. She had me so invested in this story for so long. I do think I would love to see something that is all hers and not a retelling, because it's possible that I just didn't like the end of the original story, and that's what really took it down for me with the retelling of it. I would love to know your thoughts. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later.